The US and China have reached a major step forward in trade relations by agreeing to significantly reduce tariffs on each other's goods for a period of 90 days. This agreement comes after intense but constructive negotiations in Geneva last weekend. The agreement was officially announced in a joint statement on May 12th, marking a significant cooling down in the trade confrontation between the world's two leading economies. According to the content of the agreement, the U.S. will temporarily lower tariffs on Chinese goods from a record high of 145% to 30%. Meanwhile, China also committed to cutting import tariffs on U.S. goods from 125% to 10%. The tariff reduction of over 100 percentage points from both sides demonstrates a clear effort to ease tensions and pave the way for new stages of negotiation. Speaking at a meeting after the conclusion of the negotiation round, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Benn emphasized, "We had very effective discussions, and I believe Geneva has brought the necessary calm to a constructive process." Both sides have agreed to temporarily suspend escalation measures for 90 days and significantly reduce tariffs. He also added that both sides agreed to a reciprocal tariff reduction of 115%, a move that shows goodwill and mutual concessions. Within the framework of the agreement, both sides also agreed to establish a long-term cooperation mechanism to maintain and expand bilateral economic and trade dialogue. This mechanism will be led by Chinese Vice Premier Xia Lapfong, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Benn, and U.S. Trade Representative Jamie Senner. Regular meetings may be held alternately in China, the U.S., or a third country if the parties agree. Where necessary, working groups will be established to specifically address emerging issues. Secretary Benn also emphasized the goodwill of both sides in the negotiations. Each side showed significant respect for each other's views and interests. Importantly, both the U.S. and China agreed that decoupling is not a desirable option. The announcement of this agreement comes after a week of lengthy negotiations in Geneva, where U.S. and Chinese trade officials worked intensely to avoid the risk of a full-blown trade war. According to U.S. Trade Representative Mengrea, today's agreement builds on the tariff levels that the U.S. applied in April. Previously, President Trump announced a new tariff policy in which more than 180 of the U.S.'s trading partners faced a base tariff of 10%. However, China, the largest but also most controversial partner, was hit with punitive tariffs of up to 145%, causing a wave of protest and concern globally. Just hours after the new tariffs took effect on May 9th, President Trump unexpectedly announced a 90-day suspension to give countries an opportunity to open negotiations with Washington. This move immediately triggered a wave of contact from nearly 100 countries, with China and the UK being top priorities on the negotiation schedule. Last week, Mr. Trump also announced that the US and the UK had reached a preliminary trade agreement. This agreement with China not only helps defuse a fierce trade war, but also opens up prospects for a new phase of economic cooperation between the two superpowers. In a context where global supply chains are under significant pressure from trade and geopolitical conflicts, if the US and China move towards reducing tariffs on each other's goods within 90 days, this is not only a breakthrough in bilateral relations, but also creates far-reaching ripple effects on the global trade, financial, and geopolitical landscape. Especially in a context where the world is struggling to find a stable economic order post-pandemic, post-Ukraine conflict, and amid uncertainties in global supply chains. The most obvious direct impact is on the price of goods and production costs. When tariffs are significantly reduced, the cost of imported goods decreases, increasing competitiveness and reducing input costs for businesses in both countries. U.S. consumers will benefit when items such as electronics, household appliances, and textiles from China become cheaper. Conversely, agricultural products, technology, medical equipment, and energy from the U.S. will have more competitive prices in the Chinese market. In the short term, this will help cool down inflation in the U.S., which is one of the major headaches that the Federal Reserve, Fed, has to face. China can also take advantage of this tariff reduction to increase imports, contributing to stimulating domestic consumption, which has been growing very slowly in the post-COVID period. On the international stage, this agreement could spark a new wave of expectations for the revival of globalization, which has been shaken by the rise of populism, trade wars, and the pandemic. When the two largest economies show goodwill for cooperation and do not want to decouple, global businesses will have a basis to adjust investment strategies, increase production, and expand cross-border trade instead of pursuing near-shoring or friend-shoring models to avoid political risks. Countries with high economic openness, such as Vietnam, South Korea, Singapore, and Germany, will benefit from the recovery of global trade and stability in trade between the two key partners. However, it is also important to recognize that not all industries will benefit. The influx of cheap goods can put significant competitive pressure on domestic manufacturing businesses in both the US and China. In the US, the steel, aluminum, textile, wood, and even domestic electronics component manufacturing sectors will face the risk of being overwhelmed by the wave of lower-cost Chinese goods. In China, farmers and small businesses in the agricultural, food, and industrial equipment sectors will be affected when high-quality and reasonably priced US goods flood in, if the two governments do not have appropriate support policies. A portion of the workforce may lose their jobs, exacerbating existing social problems. Another important factor strongly affected by this tariff agreement is the price of gold. Gold has always been considered a safe haven asset in the context of economic instability, geopolitical tensions, or uncertain monetary policy. The US and China temporarily putting aside tensions and moving towards a regular dialogue mechanism will reduce risk aversion in the market, thereby causing this safe haven capital to flow out of gold, pushing gold prices down. In the days before the agreement was announced, gold prices had hovered at a high level around $2,300 due to concerns about conflict in the Middle East and the possibility of the Fed maintaining high interest rates. But immediately after the tariff reduction announcement, global financial markets may rally. Stock indices will recover, the US dollar will appreciate slightly, and gold prices are likely to fall back to the 2,200 region or lower, at least in the short term. However, the impact on gold prices will not just be a simple decrease. If the market expects that this agreement is only temporary and the two sides still have the potential to become tense again after 90 days, then gold will still maintain a higher than average price because risk aversion will still exist. In addition, if the Fed decides to cut interest rates in the coming months, gold could still rise again despite the easing of trade tensions. It can be said that the temporary deep tariff reduction agreement between the US and China is a rare positive signal amidst a global picture with many dark spots. It helps ease some of the pressure from trade wars, creates opportunities for the recovery of global trade, and stabilizes financial market sentiment. However, behind this temporary calm lies a long-term challenge, including technological competition, economic security, and simmering protectionism. The world is once again facing an opportunity for adjustment, and the question is whether the parties have enough trust, vision, and courage to turn the 90-day truce into a more sustainable situation.